Welcome back to The Real Recovery Show. We meet here every week, every Friday at noon. We have over 20 episodes on themeetingspace.com right now. So if you've missed any of our previous episodes, please go and check them out. And we're on a ton of platforms, different methods for you to listen or to watch. And if you're interested in being in a future episode, you can fill out an intake form on the Meeting Space as well. Today's episode is a little bit, or a lot of it actually, on codependency, but more specifically in how to deal with and learn tools on how to stop enabling somebody who may or may not have an addiction in your family, etc. Oftentimes, especially in our society, even in today's age, there's a big stigma for alcoholism and drug addiction. A lot of times people still have a lot of ignorance about, and they'll say, why can't you just stop? I don't understand. Or people will plead with a family member and say, if you really loved me, you should be able to not do this behavior. And they don't understand. They take it quite personally. But over time, there's so much focus on those people getting help, those addicts, those alcoholics. And within a family, when one person goes and gets help, oftentimes it's recommended for the entire family to go to meetings at a rehab or a detox. And they don't necessarily understand why, but they'll go maybe to support the person that they love until they find out that there are things that they've been doing that might have prolonged or at least participated in the delay for this person to get help. A lot of times we think, and it's all well-meaning. We love a person. We want their highest good, or maybe even selfishly, we want them to show up in our own lives better, maybe have healthier relationships with us, or be able to work better with their job, or support, maybe if you're married to a person, the kids. And if you're the parent, you want the best for your child, and it breaks your heart to see that maybe they're not going down the road that you think that they should. And it can be terrifying, and it could bring up all this confusion and conflict over what you should do. What do you do if the person gets in trouble? Do you bail them out? Or do you let them have the consequences of whatever it is that they're doing? And on and on. And so, a lot of people know about, programs like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any of the 12-step programs that specifically deal with drugs or alcohol. And then if you're in recovery, or if you have a specific issue, there are all these other programs that also deal with certain really problematic behaviors like gambling or sex addiction or workaholism or just etc. and or food addiction. And yet most people, from TV and movies know about Alcoholics Anonymous as the program, right? But there are programs for people who grew up in alcoholism and who live with somebody in their life or in their family, in their home with addiction. And it's very easy to think that even if we grew up in alcoholism ourselves, if we didn't pick up a drink, we're good. Somehow we made it through unscathed or relatively unscathed. We have some resentments maybe and some issues, but we at least didn't become like them. We didn't drink and do drugs. As you know my story, I definitely went down the route of drinking and doing drugs and eating and sex and work and da-da-da-da-da. And yet we're called double winners. I don't know where the winner came from, but also like so saturated with codependency. Only the reason why we have this codependency left untreated for so long is because we call it love. And it's not. It's fear. It's insecurities, it's programming, it's belief systems, it's shoulds and shouldn'ts, it's fear. And it's a story about, who we think we need to be, and who would we be if we let this person suffer, and who would we be if we or how would they feel? Would they think that we abandoned them? or what if they die and we could have done something, and the amount of overhead in that. So I qualify for both sides of the fence because, I too had family members who were addicts, and I had developed an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and I became a hero and needed to be needed, and my whole identity. I swear, if you would look at my back, you would see at least a little bit of a cape coming out of my spine, and or wings, depending on the day. And I don't know, these were things that people praised me for, and the people who praised me for being so nice and giving and caring and helping and whatever were usually people that were manipulating me. And I wanted their love. I didn't want to be abandoned. And I liked the story, the special story about what a good person I seem to be, and how helpful I am, and not realizing that, how easy it was to manipulate me, really easy to manipulate me. And I'm not saying that from a victim perspective. I am saying it almost embarrassed how easy it was to manipulate me. If somebody wanted me to do something, all they needed to do is give me a certain percentage of praise first. Oh, you're so good at da-da-da-da-da. I'm not that good at that. Could you blah, 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 blah for me? And then it's I'll be sure, but I don't want to. I don't know why I'm doing the thing. Or, God, I'm not okay. What's the matter? Nothing. And you're I could see it because I'm hyper vigilant and all my little antennae are do picking it up. And I'm thinking, oh, I'll be there for you. Nobody's been there for you. I'll be there for you. Don't worry, you have me now. And God, did they see me a mile away? Oh my God. When you go through recovery and you heal from some of these things, and then you see people come in behind you and they're still doing those things. You see former you and you're wow, I don't know how I lived like that. God, when you have an attachment or this overdeveloped sense of responsibility, it's you feel people's feelings. You're right there with them, and their plight is your plight. Never mind your own life. Their plight is your plight. And and eventually you get to a place where you realize, hopefully you realize, maybe the show, maybe you've been to a program yourself, or maybe someone's told you that, it takes two to tango. And all the people that are manipulating, so that they could keep doing the same thing that they're doing and staying stuck in their addiction, there has to be somebody who's easy enough to manipulate. And if that person can't be manipulated, and that person that's manipulating really wants to keep doing what they're doing, they will find another way. It's amazing how, as an alcoholic and an addict, how resilient and resourceful we could be for the wrong goal. How we can make sure some way, shape, or form we get what we need. And I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been the one manipulated, and I've been the one who used people. And I definitely did both sides of this. So I feel particularly uniquely qualified. So if for all that experience just to do the show, then there you go. But yeah. And so today we're going to be talking to two women who have been in the programs of Nar-Anon and Al-Anon. And if you don't know what those programs are, Al-Anon is the program that was formed after Alcoholics Anonymous, before there were any other 12-step programs. And how Al-Anon first started out was because people who are addicts and people who are alcoholics would meet in their AA meetings, and their spouses would be there too and listen. And then they realized they would start having their own clutchy type conversations. And Bill W.'s wife was we need to formalize this. We need to make this into its own program. And Al-Anon ended up becoming a place where all family members can talk about the disease of alcoholism and what it's like for them, and what they could learn on how to best support without enabling the alcoholic. it was so divinely inspired. Both Alcoholics Anonymous and its sister program, Al-Anon, are so powerful as a movement in getting all the 12-step recovery to helping millions of people over all of these years. And so Al-Anon is basically for friends and families of alcoholics. What ended up happening is that somewhere in the middle of that, people who were really small, really young kids were having issues too, and they couldn't go to an Al-Anon meeting, so Alateen was formed. And then after that, Alateen, there were kids that were getting a little bit too old for Alateen, but felt very uncomfortable sharing in an Al-Anon meeting. And so there was a program that spun off from that called ACOA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And so all of that, and then Al-Anon started writing its own literature to re-embrace adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families into its own. And some of the best daily readers for growing up in addiction or dealing with somebody else's alcoholism are in Al-Anon to start off with. So it's so good, right? And so over time, then you have a spinoff off of AA became NA, Narcotics Anonymous. And that program really specifically focused on narcotics, but then started focusing on a general collective, inclusive, but not exclusive body for all people with all addiction from any kind of drug, any kind of mind-altering substance. And so which they also consider alcohol to be part of the drugs, right? And so while AA was really being primary purpose, and let's only talk about alcohol here, Narcotics Anonymous started to really collectively take the ball and run with it and be able to speak to, in another language, to the people who identified as more so being a drug addict. At the end of the day, over time, people have realized that there really isn't any difference between it other than the certain habits and the certain types of high and experience. But other than that, it's still self-medicating. It's still not having the coping skills. It's still needing the true support. It's still needing to heal the resentments. It's still the same 12 steps for all the 12-step programs, right? And then Nar-Anon, right? So the friends and family of the alcoholic to the AA became Al-Anon, right? And so with NA, it became Nar-Anon. And what a great program that is, too. The literature is very, very focused on specifically people who are family and friends of people who have drug addiction. And, of course, lots of people who, they're looking for an Al-Anon meeting will go to a Nar-Anon meeting, and some of the people in Nar-Anon will go to Al-Anon. And so there's no real, true, total exclusivity because there's so much rich material and tools and insights and just amazing things that you can learn that maybe you didn't learn that you might have needed to learn, in your childhood or in society in general, or just feeling like completely overwhelmed with maybe a new or maybe not so new, but to your awareness, new addiction in a family member. And what do you do? So many people who felt completely hopeless and lost and frustrated and depressed and neurotic from all the gaslighting that happens in a relationship with anyone who is in addiction, have found peace, have found loving detachment, have found tools, have found a support system, have then turned around and also done some deep healing for their own lives, and have felt have now a better life than they had before the person even started doing drugs and became their qualifier, their problem. And so today we're going to speak to Nina and to Terry, and we're going to talk about Nar-Anon, we're going to talk about Al-Anon, and we're going to talk about, even more specifically, although you can get something out of it, it doesn't have to be your child. It could be your spouse. It could be that you're in AA or NA or any 12-step program and you don't know how to deal with somebody else's addiction when somebody goes out, when somebody relapses, or a family member from there. But we're going to talk specifically about being a parent of an addict, and the discovery and and the path therein. And so, as we always do, we're going to start off by talking about our childhoods and how we were brought up to even be in a position to have the kind of thinking that maybe we needed to heal or change or learn new tools when faced with the idea of how to be most helpful without self-abandonment. So Terry, will start off with you, and you could start and share a little bit about your childhood growing up, and then we'll go to you, Nina, and then we'll just have a conversation.
Okay. Hi, I'm Terry. I'm a grateful member of Nar-Anon, which I didn't have growing up. My mom was a single mom. My father left when I was 2. And I grew up with my mom and my sister for the next 9 years. And then when I was 11, my mom met my stepdad. And he was a military guy, and my mom was a struggling single mom in Chicago. And so I think because I've learned so much in the program about my past, I can only assume that my mother had her issues that she brought to the table raising us. And that's why we landed with the stepdad that we did. Very much a security blanket for all of us, but he was a drinker. I wouldn't say he got drunk a lot. I don't remember that, but he was verbally abusive, especially to me as I was growing up. And it turned into sexual verbal abuse. You know, I'm grateful that I was 11 to 18 in those years, and so I was able to say, oh my gosh, you're my father, you're my mother's husband, that is not okay, you know. But he would slap us on the ass. My sister always stayed in the background because she was a little wild, and she was on the street more. I was a mommy's girl, so she was keen to his behavior and hated him from the get-go. I wanted a father. And I wanted to love this man and have him love me. So I withstood a lot of sexual verbal abuse over the years. To one point when I was 16, he said, hey kid, because he had traveled in the military to Thailand, and he was a player, what I learned later in life. And so we always had nudes all over our home, of painted nude women all over our home, which I wonder now how my mother allowed, right? Growing up, because what do we, chop liver next to that, right? And so he asked me at 16, when my mother wasn't home, if I would mind taking my clothes off so he could photograph me nude.
Oh.
And I was shocked. I said, no. And by then I liked, you know, Jethro Tull and Black Sabbath and smoked a little pot and had my hair, you know, like guys with long hair. And this guy was ugly as a man fence. And I'm like, oh no, you're my mother's husband and you're my father. That is not okay. And it kind of put that little wall between us, but I still wanted that love.
Yeah.
And I remember as the years went on, nothing ever happened, you know, and I was okay, but the slapping of the ass and the comments about my tits and my ass all the time. And my mother is allowing this.
Right.
She didn't know a thing about the clothes coming off thing, but I was able to stop there. And so the minute I turned 18, I couldn't wait to move out of the house and get away from it. But that's where I developed my low self-esteem. I wasn't pretty enough. My tits were too small. My ass was flat. And so I, in my young 20s, got into bodybuilding. And now I'm pumping iron and I got a body. So, you know, I look good, so you can't say anything against me, but I was so broken on the inside.
I went through that.
And so I sought out relationships that were so unhealthy. All they had to say was, wow, you know, you want a drink? You know, do you want to take your clothes off? And I'm like, love is naked, you know? And so I did that for so many years, ended up in a couple marriages. And my first husband and my fourth husband were addicted to the porn like my stepdad was. We always had Playboy and Penthouse in the house. Those were our main. My mother had Better Homes and Gardens on the kitchen table, taking a blind eye, while my dad looked at the articles in the Playboy magazine, as he would say,
and the comics. Yeah.
Yes. And so I don't know how far you want me to go, but I moved away, and I moved to Vegas when they retired here, and I, you know, got into bodybuilding, and I competed, and my dad was my biggest fan, my stepdad. And I got a professional photographer the first show, and the second one, he said, why don't you let me take the photos? And they all stunk. They were blurry. I was moving. I was posing, whatever. But he said to me, hey kid, you have so many muscles that you're going to squeeze your legs and cut some guy's dick off one day.
Oh
This
my
is
God.
how my father talked to me. So when men talked down to me, I felt it was my responsibility because I was so quick to take my clothes off and have sex that they never got a chance to know me or respect me. And so comments like, break a dick off or this or that was like, I grew up with that. So, the comments
Interesting.
that and so I developed low self-esteem, and I felt Pump and Iron would give me all that. But I was so broken inside.
Yeah.
And with that pretty much gets me through my childhood, and then I can go more on when we get...
And just so you know, because I forgot again, they're wearing masks because they're representing Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, a 12-step program, so they're maintaining their anonymity. And I forgot last time to do that too. I forgot to mention. So one of these days I'll remember in the very, very beginning that, hey, we're about to see people who are masked. But anyway... Most of this platform is on audio anyway. And so, Nina, what was your childhood like?
Hi, I'm Nina, grateful member of Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. My childhood was fear. I grew up with a lot of fear. A lot of my decisions in life were based on fear. My father was physically, mentally, emotionally abusive to me, my sister, and my mom. He drank. He also didn't drink to have he was functional. He went to work. He was a musician. There was drugs too, going on. And then probably I'd say about 10 or 11, we moved here to Vegas from New York. And my parents ended up divorcing. And I remember that was the first time I ever seen my father cry. And I don't know, but something inside me wanted to make him feel better. And this is somebody who physically, mentally, and emotionally hurt me. And that's how codependency started in my life. It was a survival tool for me while I was growing up in such abuse and dysfunction. And I remember all of a sudden just rebelling and hating my mother, and, because she wanted to leave him and yada, yada, yada. And then I remember I started hanging out downstairs. I was about 11 years old. I started hanging out with the couple downstairs who were in their early 20s. And her husband was molesting me. And I remember, as I look back at all of this stuff, and I think how unwell I was, because I really believed this man loved me, Anyway, so from then on out, my father went back to New York. My mother, it's like roles reversed. She started partying a lot. She started partying with young people, letting everybody in and letting, me, there was no parental guidance whatsoever. I remember going back to New York to stay with my dad for a little while, and then it didn't work out between me and his new wife. And I remember, and she left, but I took it upon myself one day when he was at work, because I knew my dad was so sad that my stepmom left. And I called my grandmother, who also lives on Long Island too. She came and picked me up, and I took it upon myself, okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave because my dad's not happy. And I'm going to go back to Vegas, and then maybe she'll come back home. And I remember
So you felt responsible?
Oh my gosh, it's such a young age. And I was like, I believe we're programmed at such an early age without them even knowing, because they're so unhealthy themselves, from whatever they grew up learning. I had found out later on that my grandfather was very physically abusive to my father, and so anyway, roles reversed, and there was a lot of unhealthy things going on in my home as a teenager. We were living off of 28th Street here in Vegas. Back then, it's funny because I was talking to Terry earlier, and back then we were talking, I was telling her, back then I'd roam those streets at 2 or 3 in the morning, not be scared. Today, if I wouldn't even think of doing something like that. But there was a lot of drugs I experienced with drugs, but I never got hooked because I never liked the feeling of not being in control.
Yeah, I totally get that.
I have to be in control, okay? But did I do to go along?
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Sure did. And then when I was 16 years old, I met my ex-husband, who was an addict. And but to me, he was this knight in shining armor because he played that role of, you live in this, your mother neglects you. And here, I'm going from dysfunction to living in a weekly with this guy, cleaning out his needles with bleach. Okay, I'm like 17 years old, thinking this guy loves me, and I found love, and it's the most craziest thing. Although, what's funny, you guys, is I remember when I met him, I remember thinking how odd he was and weird, and he was very forceful on me and wanted my number, and I was like, well, okay, maybe we can hang out. But during that time, I was on my way back to New York for the summer to visit my uncle and my aunt. And I remember my mom would say, this guy keeps calling, asking for you. I'm like, I don't know who he is. So I come back to Vegas. I forgot about him. A week later, off of Maryland Parkway, and I forgot what street it is, where the 7-Eleven is. And I'm standing in line, and I hear behind me, is your name Nina? And it was him. Now, in my mind, this is fate. This is fate. Are you kidding? Right?
The gods! The gods! This is a sign!
I'm like, but no,
this is
I'm
a
like,
sign.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I do know you. And I'm like, oh, but then whatever. So you know what? My journey started with, and then I moved in with him, right, like real quick.
Of course.
And like I said, we were living on weeklies and stuff. And then, I got pregnant with our first child, and I was 18. And that's it. That's it. I'm not going to party no more. That's it. I'm having a family. I'm having the family I always wanted. And that's pretty much how things had started with me.
Okay.
And 3 children later.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, so like I said, I played both sides of the fence, right? So, so I was a stripper for pretty much most of the 90s, right? And so when I was in my addiction, I would white knuckle it all day long. I would be a good girl all day long at the strip club because I don't want anybody being able to do anything that I don't want them to do. Like, I was so that person that would then, as the night would go, people became less people to me and more, what am I going to do later? How much money am I making? How much time do I have left? And then I would leave work, go get stuff, go home, and do all the things. Then go to sleep, wake up, drink coffee, work out, eat my little cans of tuna, so that I can get all the water weight out, go back on stage,
it's
dance.
Like you compartmentalize.
I had 2 lives going because I couldn't give up control.
Yeah.
That's why when I would go in my own recovery, I could never identify with the people that were only drinking or doing drugs to fit into the mass group and stuff like that, because while I had drank and did drugs a tiny bit at work, I didn't like that. I didn't like the risk, especially being a stripper. I was topless and sometimes fully nude, and so there's very little protection that you have. And if so, if you've left your body, good luck with what happens. And so I couldn't handle that. You know, I had been raped by 3 guys when I was 17, and I had like major control issues around that kind of a thing. So, but all that control, all that stuffing my feelings, all that acting, all that being, you know, and I'll say this last thing, I was obviously codependent, because when somebody turned up missing because their drug dealer died in their house, the narcotics and homicide detectives came to the strip club looking for me, not because they thought that I had something to do with it, but because they thought I would know something, because I seemed to be the only person who was lucid. Like at the club. Like, it's so weird.
Well, if I might add, though, it's been my experience, and even with my boys today, who are addicts, but they have a lot of Al-Anon in them.
Yeah.
A lot of Al-Anon in them.
Yeah, a lot of codependency.
Yes.
Well, because the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and this is a family disease, you know. It's the thinking. Even if somebody never picks up a drink, they still have the thinking. They still have the habits, the tools, the lack of tools, the coping mechanisms from growing up. Because if you don't heal on one level, you're going to pass it on, whether you like it or not. People even have children, they're in recovery, but they have stuff to heal.
Right.
And it just gets passed on generation to generation. And then there's also the genetic components they're finding more and more these days about what makes somebody more predisposed to having an addiction. You know, some people, they process alcohol differently, or they're chemically balanced or not balanced in a certain way. And so they'll be looking, if they don't have enough tools, if they don't feel it, or if they have trauma in their childhood or anything happens, they will be looking to self-medicate in a certain particular way, right? And they become their own drug dealer, you know, their own pharmacist. And so you don't have the tools, right? You have, and you're believing all your codependency is love, and then you have kids, and it just goes generation to generation. And sometimes the actual addiction doesn't happen. It could happen on this level, and then it doesn't happen in the kids, but it happens in their kids.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that's also happened a lot. They think, oh, you know, we'll be a teetotaler, meaning I'm not going to drink, we're not going to do anything, we're going to be such good people, yada, yada. And then they have children, and they never really dealt with entirely the thinking, right? They just didn't do the drinking. And then they have the kids, and the kids are... There's still an element of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
Right.
There's still an element of, you know, shoulds, and
they learn those behaviors.
They learn them.
They
How
learn
could they?
the sick behavior.
Even if you're not teaching them, they're watching you.
Well, like you said, because alcoholism, I think any addiction, like for alcoholism, drinking is a symptom of it. Because like you said, it's a thinking problem. It's a disease of behaviors and relationships that are passed on and on and on until the pattern or recovery sets in and is broken. My youngest son, he passed away 11 years ago. He was, we'll say dual diagnosis. He was bipolar.
Okay.
But it was funny because when I first got him help for it and they discovered it, he was also using too and taking pills.
And how well of a diagnosis can anybody really get?
Couldn't. If
somebody's self-medicating, I mean, it's impossible to really know.
Right, but yet their father, which I know we're talking about kids, but he was also dual diagnosed with manic, with bipolar and polysubstance abuse.
Who also did drugs.
Exactly, and they call that polysubstance abuse in the mental health field.
But it's all circular because they did drugs because they didn't feel comfortable in their own skin, and they did drugs that would overcorrect, and now they're dependent on, so the brain's not producing certain neurotransmitters in the same level that they need to, and hormones and whatever. And so whatever happens, whichever the drug is or the alcohol, the behavior that we do, it does change
the chemical imbalance
in
your brain.
It makes a chemical imbalance. It does change the patterns of neurotransmitters in our brains. And because of that, when people come off of alcohol and drugs, there's a whole restabilization as the brain goes, you want me to make this stuff again. oh, okay, well, you're going to have to wait a little bit because you've burned out all the receptors and we've become extremely sensitive. So you're going to have some serious jitters and you're going to be a complete basket case for a little bit.
And that's why they say it's harder. The disease progresses as you get older and the longer you're using. Yeah. That's why it's harder the older you get to stop and how it progresses in your brain.
Yes.
And it just makes it harder and harder.
That's why also, because it is a pattern, it's a brain pattern of neurotransmitter levels. I always think of it like when you have a stereo with the treble and the bass, and you see this like, okay, we'll have a little bit of this, and there's this pattern, right? Well, so we have neurotransmitters and we have inhibitors in our brain, and so we are having a certain pattern, and we are when it starts to go down, we want to get something, we want to bring it, and we really have a pattern. And so it's so what the body's used to. The body loves homeostasis. It doesn't mean that this is the optimal situation for the body or the brain. The body just adapts so well, and it says, this is our normal. We are going to help you maintain this normal. And so what ends up happening is when the person doesn't have the drug of choice, the body says, aren't you supposed to be having this right now? Like, and will send cravings, and the mind will literally feel like and be so convinced, just like you were so convinced that this person was like your love, and you were so convinced that this person was somebody you needed to give all this attention to and love. It's like the mind will so be convinced that if it doesn't do this behavior, that it's going to either die or suffer so tremendously, and there's nothing like withdrawals to really fully convince a person. But so when it comes to it being a family disease, you can't help a person while you're drowning. Withdrawals,
you said.
Yeah.
I've actually had withdrawals of not enabling anymore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know?
Who am I now?
Yeah.
Right,
Who am I if I don't help this
absolutely.
person?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, so it's kind of funny because there's a moment in every codependent's life when they're in recovery when it dawns on them that all this time they've been talking and pointing to somebody else's addiction, and then they realize that they too had an addiction, that the addict was their addiction.
Yes.
Exactly. That's when my son got into drug court 9 years ago. The judge said that, I want you to go get some help, and I'm going to send you to a 4-day drug program to learn about the brain disease, which I thought it was a choice. And he said, and he called me in chambers because I worked in the system, and so he felt very comfortable calling me back there. And he said, now you've asked me 4 times in less than 5 minutes to fix my son. And he said, I get it. I heard it the first time. You're insane. And I'm like, are you calling me insane? And I was very egotistical.
Like, don't you know who I think I am?
I've worked in the system 30 years already in this courthourse. And so, I'm all that, right?
Yeah.
My ego and my pride. And I go, how could I be insane and have such a good job and own my own home and own my own car? And he goes, no. Your son is addicted to heroin, and you're addicted to him. That was like you might as well said, blah, 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 blah. And so the judge said, who's the most important person in my courtroom? And he had the kids on one side and the parents on the other. And I said, he is. He goes, he is? You don't matter? And I go, well, yeah, I matter. In my mind, I didn't matter.
Right.
It was all about the addict.
Right.
By then, my daughter and her dad and his new wife had moved out of state, so I get to focus all this energy on the addict.
Oh,
I'm such a good
so
mom.
awesome.
I know. And my credit rating tanked.
Right.
Because I'm rescuing the car and the insurance, and I didn't ever post bail because I didn't understand that they could take my home, and I knew I didn't have enough cash in the bank to do that because I'd spent all my money. And I was telling Nina today, we were reading Step 1 again, and we're doing this actual recovery 12 books. It's 12 books. Each step has a book. And I said, I used to lie to get money from my mom when she was alive because I was so broke helping the addict. I couldn't pay my own bills.
Right.
And I had to take care of that. And this feeling that I have to save him. He can't save himself. Then the drug court comes, and I have to go to Nar-Anon. And I know a lot of moms and dads, they come in, and spouses of addicts, crying, and they're just beside themselves, and they think that there's something they've done, and they want a quick fix. How do I fix the addict, and then I won't need your meeting anymore?
Right.
And so I go in with my arms folded, and you already see that I got an attitude.
Right.
Like, I am not the addict. I
Right.
don't even know why I'm here.
Right.
But I had to go for 18 months to 2 years while this drug court lasted.
Do a lot of people get court ordered to go to Nar-Anon?
Yes.
They do.
They do, because when the judge, and I don't want to use his name, said that the family was part of the problem, that the addict was addicted to drugs and the family was addicted to the kid, he made the parents go to these programs
Perfect.
to get help.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
And I will tell you, praise God, that in 9+ years, I have learned so much about myself. I have a little disability now since my surgery, but I have joy every day in my life. I still have an addict. He's not presently in his disease, but I had so much dysfunction in my life, so many unhealthy relationships, because I was so broken on the inside. And when I started working a 12-step program, I started realizing my dad left. My stepdad left.
Right.
I lived with a guy 3 years. He married someone else, moved her in our home that we bought together, and bought me out, right, for nothing. He bought me out for nothing. I signed a quitclaim deed. Stupid. And and my sponsor on
I'm like, right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But look at me. I still
Just
have a
nodding my
house
head
and
like, and?
I got a house and a car and a job. Aren't I all that? And my life is crumbling on the inside.
Right.
My insecurity levels are at an all-time high because I've been abandoned. My sponsor is the one that said, you have abandonment issues.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to call it.
Yeah.
I just knew that I didn't want you to leave me.
Yeah.
And I found the most unhealthy relationships, people that I could control. And so when I finally married my daughter's father, I thought, we're going to have the perfect family. And don't we all look shiny and bright on the inside? The man never talked to anybody. I was focused on Nick because his dad had died when he was 2, and he had abused drugs, but he didn't have any in the system years later when he died, but his heart had failed him. And so I have this beautiful daughter who I thought, God, she's lucky. She's got a mom and a dad, and we act like we love each other, and we have this beautiful home, and she has everything she could possibly want. And if you talk to my daughter, she will tell you about her childhood trauma. And because of this program, I'm healthy enough to say, I'm so sorry.
That's beautiful.
I had no idea.
That's so beautiful.
She said, Mom, Dad talked to nobody. You talked to Nick. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was lonely. And all my friends.
You have a mask on.
Okay. So, anyway, so she said, she tells people when they say, you must have had 1,000 friends growing up. You're so funny and bubbly. And she's also a stripper in Salt Lake City. And she said, I wasn't. I had a very lonely childhood because nobody talked to me.
Yeah.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Not because of anything to do with me, but that this child, the most beautiful soul inside and out, not my addict, grew up sad. And it's because her mother and father were so broken.
It's so not available.
This program, this Nar-Anon 12-step program, has taught me so much about my childhood, my mother's life, my life. I can love people unconditionally. My daughter's the most beautiful soul in the world, and we talk a couple times a day. She's just so precious, and I missed out on that because of my codependency and my fear of failure.
What a testimony. Oh, my God. That's so beautiful. I feel like the fact that you can turn around and because it's just something that happens when a child grows up in a home where there is any kind of, whether there's drinking or using or people are just distracted strongly, right?
Yeah.
On something having to do with addiction or just dysfunction, where a child can feel so invisible
Yeah.
and invalidated and not important, and this is how we break the chain, and this is how we circle back, and we clean up the wreckage by going and having new conversations. And I've watched so many people who are able to turn around and not only have those conversations like, listen, it's so interesting because in the men's is, healing and looking at ourselves and seeing where we could have done differently, and really seeing what was driving the bus to make us do what we did in the first place, or not show up. And then in finding out that by learning about what's going on, the thinking behind the scenes and what we would rather do, we have a shift in our perception, and we genuinely feel a compassion towards the person that we might have neglected or we might have hurt, no matter what it is, and to be able to turn around and make an amends. An amends said that, hey, who I was and what I did back then, you don't deserve that. And who I am now and what I realize now wouldn't do that. And it's there's a part of, because like you guys were sharing, when you grow up the way you do, you internalize and you tell yourself what you deserve and what you don't deserve, right?
You don't know what you don't know.
Right. And you don't know, and then you go and you do the thing.
You go into program, you learn, your eyes are open. One of my living amends is this program to my children. I go to this program not only for me and amends to me, but for my kids.
You can't give what you don't
have.
Because
you're talking about with your daughter, and I'm thinking how, sure, my boys, raising 3 boys, they had everything they needed, everything they wanted, but was I there emotionally for them? No, I was not completely 100% not there emotionally for all 3 of them, because I was so obsessed and busy focusing on the addict, their dad. So, and I look back, and you go through that guilt, and I still struggle with it at times. I've gotten a lot better with it because of program and working on myself and remembering I didn't know what I didn't know. I only knew what was taught to me, and so now being in program and working on myself is making that living amends.
And it also works upward too, up the family tree. Because when you go and you're in recovery and you're like, okay, I see what I was thinking, I see what I was doing, and I see why I was thinking it, why I was doing it. And if I trace it back, where did I get this idea? And what was the experience that I told myself, this interpretation of it, about how maybe I'm not enough or too much, or this is what love is, or this is what I have to do, or whatever. And then you go up the family tree and you just kind of shake it a little bit, and you see the bottles, and you see the emotional unavailability, and you see the militaristic whatever, or you see the sex abuse or sex addiction or anything, and you see this stuff. And then you go, okay, you know what was going on with them? And then you're able to look at your own parents. You're able to, and I was able to look at my parents and see what their childhoods were like. I remember in recovery, they gave me the assignment of picture your parents as little kids. And so I pictured my parents as little kids, and I was blown away, because I heard some stories, like my dad beat me, but my dad's dad beat him, and my mom was very shaming, like, you don't need to eat this, and body shaming. I had to having body dysmorphic disorder too, and like always saw a fat kid when I would look in the mirror. But it was crazy. But my mom was an ex-model who ended up gaining weight, and she was all messed up about it, and I was all on me, kind of a thing. But like all the resentments, all the thinking, all the I'm never going to be like them, this is never going to happen to me. I'm never going to be an addict, or I'm never going to think this way. I'm never going to be that selfish. I'm never blah, 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 blah. And but yet you could say we're sponges. You could say no matter what, I'm not going to soak in any water. I'm not going to soak in any water. I'm not going to soak in any water, as you're in a bath. And it's like you're in the bath of dysfunction, trying not to be dysfunctional while you're having genuine needs of joining, and they're not getting met, and genuine needs of having a good healthy self-concept mirrored back to you that's not being mirrored back. Instead, it's bumping up against them. They're taking it personally and they're not healthy.
Right.
And so, of course, you do what you did because you learned what you learned from who did what they did, from what they learned, and on and on and on and on until it goes into the clouds. And you don't even know that part of the family tree.
After generation
and so it has to stop here. It has to keep stopping.
The dysfunction stops here.
And if you don't do recovery,
today, my family,
if you don't heal this stuff, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
And if you don't heal from what hurt you, you're going to bleed on people that never cut you.
Right.
And I bled on many people in my adult life. But today, like I said, I haven't dated in over 9 years, and I'm okay with that. I have actually got to know myself over 9 years, and I like myself. I mean, I actually like my own company. I have a dog, and
that's
we get along
healthy.
great. Yeah,
that's so healthy.
Yeah, I don't need anybody to complete me. My thing is, I am so passionate about recovery and 12-step programs, whatever they look like, that I love the newcomer. I love when they walk in and they just are so lost, and that I can give them that breath of hope, and not all survive this disease, but I can give them that hope that it's not personal. They're not doing it to you.
Yeah.
And so we need to focus on your life, how you live your daily life, what you feed into it to make you the best person you can be. And to heal and from whatever childhood trauma you bring with. And that you don't have to enable to, like, I'm afraid they'll be mad or they won't love me.
Right.
I've learned the word no. They don't question it when I say no, that doesn't work for me.
Isn't it amazing how easy it is to say it now? God. And it was the hardest thing to say before?
I would say yes, and I can tell you in many instances in relationships when they were turning me every way but inside out. And inside, I was screaming no because I saw my dad, and his verbal abuse. And I wanted to say no, but I wanted to people please. And I thought they'd like me if I finished the act. And I felt so empty at the end. I am not that person today.
Yeah, do you know, so I feel like a lot more people would go to Al-Anon and Nar-Anon if they really, really understood that that the reason why that they're so focused on another person is because they don't want to look at themselves. And I know that's a really harsh thing to say. I know a lot of times people think that they are looking at themselves, but I'm telling you, there's something so satisfying for a person to point to somebody else's issues and to feel like they're doing better than the other person, to get that kind of, but yet, and I wouldn't even have this stress in my life if it wasn't for this other person, but yet they're not able to let go and take care of themselves in the situation, because what would they do? Like you were talking about the withdrawal. What would you do if you didn't have to play this codependent role? Who would you be? It's like kind of like a twist on the empty nest syndrome.
Well, I think first of all they have to believe too that it's a disease and everybody is affected in the family. That's why they say when one person goes into rehab and they do the family stuff and they say for the family to go into program too, because if you were to put that person back into that sickness, they're going to go right back, be triggered, go back to their old behaviors.
That's so true.
So what you were saying too, I think a lot of it is believing that it's a disease and acceptance.
Really getting though that it's just thinking, it's just programming. It's not like because people balk at even the suggestion, like you did, that I even have a problem. No. My problem is this other person. If they would just XYZ, I would be okay. And they don't see that the very fact that they're basing their serenity on their on what another person does.
Right.
That they're making this person into the more important than them.
Making him their God.
You tell a parent this, and a parent will say, you don't understand what it's like to be a parent then. Because, you have to move in front of a bus to protect your child, and blah, 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 blah.
Listen, I lost my child.
Yeah.
Okay? And I will say there's nothing like that, okay, ever. You don't
You don't
get
ever
over
wanna
it. You
overload
learn
it.
to live
Yeah.
with it. That's all it is.
You don't move on, you
But
move forward.
I found when I started coming to Nar-Anon, which was a couple of years ago, because I had already been in Al-Anon. I've been in Al-Anon for quite a long time, but my one son was staying with me, and his drug of choice is heroin. And I was petrified. I will admit, I was petrified to, kick him out. He was living in Hawaii for a while, doing wonderful. A lot of things happened. His father passed away on the streets from an OD, and we didn't even know about that too. It was like 2 years, nobody knew where he was. But so that triggered him, and he went back to using, and he had come back home with me for a little while. And and it took me a while, but I was terrified because I didn't want to lose another child. How selfish of me to keep him in his addiction so I don't lose another child. I'm not his God. Okay, but that just doesn't come on like that. I mean, you have to do a lot of work, a lot of processing. I had to realize my fear is hindering him.
Yeah. It's
So
really
I had to do what I had to do. And today he's clean, thank you.
It's really important that people know that, though, that it takes, and then speaking from an addiction perspective, being in the alcoholic and the addict in the room, I will say, people could tell you that you have a problem. People can bail you out of things. People can provide a roof over your head. They could sit there and they could talk to you till they're blue in the face. They could give you all the money that they think that is going to fix the thing. They can get you all the therapists. But until in
You are
yourself,
done.
you're done, you're not.
And that's the same with
Exactly.
us, though, too. Like, we have slips.
Right.
To me, going through that process, and because
Yeah.
you were helping me with it.
Right.
I was having a really hard time, but I got through it. But I had to go back and ask myself, what step am I on?
Right.
I need to redo my steps. What is this? What's the fear? Can I control it? Because for me, it's like control is like, it's an illusion. It's not the way I want it to be. But nobody promised me it was going to be this way.
Right.
Life is just. This is just the way it is. So what can I do to try to make it better?
Yeah.
For me.
Right.
What's the solution? And that's what we learn in Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, is focusing on ourselves, because we do. A lot of people come in and they think that there's some magical thing we're going to say to them to fix their addict or alcoholic. But no, they soon, as they keep coming back, they realize, this is about you.
Yeah.
You get to grow spiritually, emotionally, mentally. You get to take care of you for once in your life, and just it's amazing. And we learn solution. What's the solution?
Yeah, don't become part of the problem. I can tell you, I coined a phrase 9+ years ago because I tell you, I was pissed. I'm like, you're going to drug court. You're not living here anymore. Home is not an option. I coined the phrase, and it's been used for 9+ years in different meetings and stuff around town, that home is not an option. And I guess my bark was bigger than my bite, because my son's been homeless. He's lived in his car, broken into abandoned houses, and been evicted from several apartments. And we don't have time today, but it's a joke how many times I move the furniture, still enabling. I can't lose that 12-year-old furniture, with burn holes in it, know. But anyway, I said, and he said, well, I'll just try the court and see. F no. Oh, no, you're not coming. Home is not an option. And he has never, now he's been sober almost 3 years.
Nice.
But he has figured it out. And I got to the point, because of program, when he would call and he'd say, hey, Mom, what you doing? You could tell the voice. I said, what's up? He says, and I'm at the gym pumping iron, it was my safe place. And he said, I've been evicted and I'm at the door of, this detox place. I'm going into detox. And I've already called Kurt. He's got a bed for me. And he goes, God, I'm embarrassed. But he told me, we're just glad you're back. Not all get to come back. And I said, well, honey, I'm in the middle of a workout. And this is how calm I am with all the relapses now.
Right.
Because of program.
Right.
Working this program. It's not personal. He's not doing it
You
to
don't
me.
react, you
I have
respond.
no control over anything. Powerless. Step
Right.
one, you got to keep going back. Powerless
Right.
over anything outside this hula hoop I throw around me. I got no power. And so I'd say, hey, hon, just call me when you get settled and maybe we'll go to lunch in a couple weeks. Calm, as I'm telling you right now, because of program. When he graduated the drug court and within a month or so relapsed, he said he wanted to start using again because it made him feel normal, like we talked about that normal feeling. I cried, I screamed, I called people up, I called my sponsor, she didn't answer. I called a woman that I trust that's been in drug counseling for now 30 years, and she's yelling at me saying, why are you crying? It's not personal. He's not doing it to you. Where's your tools? I'm like, what fucking tools? And I'm a mess.
Right.
And I was a mess for days, and I got a new sponsor and started on the steps, and I have to say it's been 7 years that I have been healing. I'm not healed because I keep
Right.
coming back.
Right.
I tell people, you don't graduate.
Yeah.
You
No.
don't graduate from this program. Every time I go to a meeting and I share to help somebody else, I get something from them.
Absolutely.
I absolutely do. And I'll keep running that meeting if I have 3 people or 9 people.
So the meeting she's talking about is at the meeting space, and it's every Sunday
At 4 p.m.
At 4 p.m. And it happens to also be the same time that there's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at 4 o'clock too. So if you
It's
do have
called
somebody,
Sunday Serenity.
you could bring someone there, and we have another Nar-Anon meeting in Saturday mornings as well. Just go to themetingspace.com for the schedule. And wow, we're out of time, and I have to tell you, I know there's so much that we could talk
I know
about.
we could talk another hour. Yeah.
But I thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
Thank you for having
And
us.
man, like this is just a tiny bit of the resource that you could find if you go to a Nar-Anon or an Al-Anon meeting, and go to themetingspace.com and look at the schedule, and go online and see what meetings you could find. You can also find them on Zoom. Please also remember that even though they are speaking from their own personal experience from Nar-Anon and Al-Anon, that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and don't represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. And you can watch us on Facebook and YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV. Or you can listen to us on the PHLV radio app. You can get our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And all of our episodes are always posted on themetingspace.com. Just click on The Real Recovery Show, and you can see a link of all the shows. We always post them every Friday. Thank you again for joining us today on The Real Recovery Show. Thank you, ladies, for joining us as well.
Thank you for having us.
And we'd like to give a special thanks now to our sponsor, gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.